Welcome to the Stronger Than Steel podcast with your hosts Austin Davidson and John Keir, talking Steelers all the time. Now, here's Austin and John.
Hello and welcome back to another edition of the Stronger Than Steel podcast. My name is John Keir, and today I am back talking about offensive tackles. Again, just another solo episode, Season 6, Episode 5, Part 2. I'll be talking about the 4 offensive tackle prospects that I got a chance to look at in this pre-draft process. And without further ado, let's get right into things. Why don't we? Why don't we start talking about offensive tackles and who the Steelers currently have on the roster. So, offensive line, a position group in general that the Steelers have been looking to overhaul, especially in terms of the running game, as Art Rooney declared for what felt like the 4th year in a row that the Steelers need to do a better job of running the football, and that would obviously mean that you're evaluating more than just the running back position. That's also going to include offensive tackle, offensive guard, centers, and as we know, Marquise Pouncey's retirement opens up a hole at center. But what about the tackles? Alejandro Villanueva is still a free agent. The other 2 returning players are Zack Banner, who played in 1 game last season. Hasn't played much throughout his NFL career. Only 1 game with more than 50 snaps, and I believe that was the Week 1 game this past season. And you have Chukwuma Okorafor, the returning right tackle, starter for the most of last season, who got beaten out by Banner at the start of the year. Okorafor has been okay. Not great, but he was supposed to be a long-term developmental project, and it took him a while to get on the field, but now that he's been playing, can we expect another jump from him? Time will tell. I don't know how the team views him right now, but it seems like they're comfortable going into this upcoming season with him. And with Banner being signed to a team-friendly prove-it sort of deal, it looks like those 2 guys will be the starters. With Villanueva on the way out and their starters in place, the Steelers decided to sign free agent lineman Joe Hague, who can play guard and tackle. And frankly, I think he'd be a decent option as a blocking tight end, like an extra tight end, and as a backup only. And frankly, I think he was a little overpaid. I don't think that his signing was 100% necessary, but the Steelers made that move. So as long as he's used in a reserve role, I suppose that's good enough. Elsewhere on the roster, the Steelers have the likes of Brandon Walton, Anthony Coyle, Jerron Jones, Avante Collins, a whole bunch of guys that are either younger players or guys that have been basically depth fillers. I don't want to say camp bodies because that's kind of disrespectful. But it's a position group that there's only 3 currently proven commodities right now in Hague, Banner, and Okorafor. And question marks with the starting tackles as is. Can Okorafor continue to get better? Can Banner make good on the faith that the Steelers have placed in him? So this is certainly a position that could be addressed in the draft. Maybe not with the first pick that I was originally thinking at the start of the offseason. But we also don't know if the Steelers are going to re-sign Villanueva because he's still out there. So it makes me wonder if he could return. But with that in mind, since we don't know that he might be back or whether or not he will be back, why don't we take a look at some guys that the Steelers might have some interest in. And keep in mind, at pick 24, the Steelers will most likely not be able to grab one of the top 2 or 3 tackles unless there is a surprising fall for one of those guys. So guys like Penei Sewell and Rashawn Slater are likely going to be off the board, possibly Christian Darrisaw as well. So with that in mind, I wanted to do a brief overview of the 4 guys I looked at. I looked at Alex Leatherwood from Alabama, Robert Hainsey from Notre Dame, Tevin Jenkins from from Oklahoma State, and Alaric Jackson from Iowa. So why don't I get started talking about Tevin Jenkins. He's probably the most highly regarded of these 4 tackles from Oklahoma State. A redshirt senior, 6'6" and 320 pounds, absolutely looks the part on paper and on the field. Former 2-time All-Kansas and All-League player in high school. He played basketball and baseball in addition to football. After redshirting his freshman year, he was a reserve offensive lineman and then became a starter his redshirt sophomore season and was an All-Big 12 honorable mention. And then he was an All-Big 12 honorable mention once again as a redshirt junior. Chuba Hubbard, who I'll be talking about in a couple episodes from now, and as far as the running backs go, he helped him lead the entire FBS in rushing yards. And then this past season, he had 7 starts and was a first-team All-Big 12 selection before opting out for the final month of the season. And he was an invite to the Senior Bowl. So, as far as Tevin Jenkins goes, I wanted to highlight some of his better attributes, and in my opinion, his top attribute has to be his ability as a run blocker. This is something that really intrigued me because when you're talking about the Steelers wanting to improve their running game, Tevin Jenkins is one of the best run blocking offensive linemen I've looked at throughout not just this entire process, but overall. He is a people mover. Bread and butter, down blocks or one-on-one. Jenkins is a really good run blocker, and he can get seal blocks. He can make any type of run blocks you need. This guy was really helpful at all levels on both sides for the Oklahoma State offensive line, and it's quite evident not only on tape but in the numbers that Chuba Hubbard put up 2 years ago, and the numbers that this offense put up. He was a really big part of this running game, and the fact that he did so successfully in college, I think bodes well for him at the NFL level. So that's obviously very good for him. A couple other things. Number 2 is his violence. So not only is he a great run blocker, but he is a mean guy on the field. Doesn't look all that intimidating when you see his player picture, but he plays like a bully. And maybe sometimes you have to be careful with guys like that and catching penalties, but you want to talk about imposing your will, putting fear in defenses, in those gotta-have-it situations, or even just running out the clock to end a game. This is not a guy you want bearing down on you, because he will plant you whenever he gets the chance, and you're not going to win a fight with him because of his size and his strength. And that's the other great thing about him, is especially his upper body strength. I saw several instances on tape where all he had to do was just kind of shove a guy with his hands out of the way, and a hole was opening up behind him. So that was obviously all very good for him. The downsides, though, the 2 things I saw that I thought could have been better were, number 1, his athleticism, generally speaking. The Steelers, over the last decade, give or take, have employed more athletic linemen as opposed to big, hulking people movers. And that's done them a lot of well, but this is one instance where Jenkins slides on the opposite side of that, where he can move, but you can tell he's not going to move as fast as Marcus Gilbert used to. And Marcus Gilbert wasn't a guy that was put on the move a ton, but when he was asked to, he could move pretty quickly and efficiently. And there isn't a ton of tape of Jenkins as far as him on the move. He's more of a block down, one-on-one type of guy. He shouldn't be really used as a lead blocker. If you have to use him pulling, I'd recommend using him for kick-out blocks. Perimeter screens are going to be an issue right now. I imagine he's going to slim down a little bit and add more muscle, so he'll probably get better in this area. But right now, just not where you'd want it to be. Also, he had some trouble. This could possibly be another problem relating to his athleticism, but I felt like he struggled picking up blitzes. A lot of times just not being able to get out there fast enough. His pass blocking wasn't as good as his run blocking, in my opinion. But there were some times on tape where he just failed to read something correctly. So, with that in mind, those were his 2 biggest weaknesses on tape. And the third one, which is not really a tape thing, but it's more so just he's 23 years old. And sometimes when you are that old, going up against younger players who are just playing college for the first time at 18, 19 years old, sometimes you can look better because of that. So that's something to keep in mind, that possibly he could just be beating up on younger and weaker players who haven't gotten to their ceiling yet. So with that in mind, those are the positives and negatives of Tevin Jenkins. Overall, I really liked what I saw from Tevin Jenkins. I know that he's older. I know he was pushing around smaller players. And I know that the defenses you see in the Big 12 aren't always the best. Usually they're pretty bad comparative to the other Power 5 conferences. But if you're looking to remake the Steelers' ground game, drafting a guy like Tevin Jenkins will show me that the Steelers are serious about that. He's got a great mean streak to him. He blocks in the running game like you would want a great run-blocking right tackle to. I don't think he can play the left a little bit in college, but he profiles better as a right tackle. So I don't know where that puts him long-term. I would assume that if the Steelers were to take a guy like him, he'd be on the bench this year as an extra tackle. And I know usually you want your first-round pick to play right away, so that might be difficult to stomach. But I really like his upside. If he can get his footwork figured out and just get a little more cleaner as a pass protector, I think he's got a legitimate shot to be a 10-year player at offensive tackle, if not longer. There might be a bit of an adjustment period with him just because of the talent level of the edge rushers in the NFL, comparatively speaking, to the Big 12. So maybe it is a good thing if he sits right away, which is why I could see him slipping possibly past the late first round and into the second round. If he's somehow available at 55, I'd scoop him up in a heartbeat. But, of course, we won't know until draft day. But I'd even think that at 24 it might be worth it. But, again, you're talking about a team that's in win-now mode, and you want guys that can help right away. And as much as I like Jenkins, I don't think he's going to be able to do that right away. And his floor, of course, is that he can't, assuming he can't get better in pass protection, he'll continue to be not necessarily a liability at this point, but he'll never be anything more than solid. And in the pass-happy NFL, if he's not on a team that fully takes advantage of his run-blocking ability, they don't run the ball as much, and they don't run the right system for him, they run more of a zone blocking scheme, he could find himself as a backup for a number of years before fading away. So that was Tevin Jenkins. Next, I'm going to be talking about Alex Leatherwood. Leatherwood, a 6'6" senior from Alabama, was a unanimous 5-star player and was ranked as the number 8 player in ESPN's top 300 list when he was in high school, and was also coached by former Heisman Trophy winner Charlie Ward in high school, so that's kind of interesting. Leatherwood is a former champion, playing in 7 games at left tackle as a freshman as a member of Alabama's championship team. His sophomore season, he made All-SEC second team and started 15 games at right guard. So he was originally a was originally a tackle, then moved to guard, moved back to left tackle, starting 13 games as a junior, and was the first team All-America for the AFCA, and first team All-SEC. And then last year was a part of the offensive line that won the Joe Moore Award, which is the best offensive line in the FBS. And was a unanimous first-team All-American, first-team All-SEC selection, and also something to note, he played in 41 consecutive games by the end of last season, and was a part of the 2020 national champions, 13 more starts at left tackle last year. So after 41 career starts between guard and tackle, Leatherwood is a 2-time champion coming out, and I wanted to highlight some of his best traits, and in my opinion, pass protection is his best trait, He does an excellent job of setting up and pass pro with his feet. I think he does a good job of mirroring edge rushers, and his fantastic arm length helps him get his hands onto defenders pretty quickly, and he's got pretty good upper body strength as well. So his pass protection is pretty good, and since he's played a lot of left tackle, that's a position where you generally want a better pass blocker. So I thought that he was a pretty reliable guy blocking for both Mac Jones and Tua Tagovailoa in the past. Also, one difference from Tevin Jenkins to him is that Leatherwood is a pretty good athlete, and there were times I felt like it didn't necessarily show on tape, but for a guy that's as big as he is, he can get on the move in a hurry, and he can even be a good lead blocker at times as well. Alabama ran a ton of quick screens to guys like Devontae Smith, and he had to get out there and help on blocks, so he did a good job with that, and that's something that's worth noticing and keeping tabs on. On the flip side, though, unlike Tevin Jenkins, I really felt like the two biggest issues, and you can debate whether or not this is important in your opinion, but one issue I felt like I saw with Leatherwood was just violence, and I just felt like there were not just like violence in terms of like being a bully on the field. I'm just talking about, I just felt like he didn't either gave up on plays too quickly or just didn't finish plays the way he should have. He didn't finish by driving a guy, trying to impose his will by putting them on the ground. Instead, he'd just kind of stop and turn around, which, I understand is kind of a natural reaction when you're playing football. Sometimes you want to see what's going on. But I just felt like there were so many instances on tape where I was like, just finish the play. Don't turn around. Just, come on, keep going. You're doing such a great job. But he just couldn't help himself. And to his credit, he usually was fine. But there were other times that I felt like he could have done more to help his case, or he could have done more to help the play, and a play either got blown up or a short gain could have been a longer gain. Also, his footwork after his initial setup in pass pro and his initial drive, because he does get off the ball pretty quickly, I just felt kind of frantic to me. His base is just way too wide, by the way. You see a lot of guys having problems with the narrow base and they get knocked over really easily. Leatherwood's base is just so wide he can't even get a push because of it. It's like he's just anchored down and he can't move forward at all. So he needs to be coached up a bit there in that regard. Also doesn't do a good job of chopping his feet later in the play, which I kind of already alluded to. Best attributes. Worst attributes. I forgot to mention the whole talent and production scale. So I like to try to pinpoint on a graph, in my opinion, where these guys land on a scale of talent to production. So, a lot of times you see guys drafted with a ton of talent but not a ton of production, and vice versa, not a lot of production but a ton of talent. And I think that my analogy for that was Jarvis Jones to Jadeveon Clowney, and that might be a bit extreme, but I'm talking about a guy that had a ton of sacks in college as opposed to not much talent, and the reverse was true for Clowney. Not a ton of production, but he was obviously very talented. So really quickly jumping back to Tevin Jenkins, this is a guy that's somewhat talented, but I'd call him like an average talent in terms of offensive tackle, but his production over the course of his college career was pretty good. Leatherwood, I'd say the talent is up there. The production was good, but not great. See, I didn't love what I saw from Alex Leatherwood. I understand why teams and scouts and analysts like what they saw from him. There's a lot there to like, and he did a good job over his career without really finishing plays the way I thought he could have. And I don't know that I'd call it an effort issue, but I just feel like he could have been even better than he was, and I'm not sure if he's going to ever unlock that full potential. So I mean, upside for Leatherwood, you're talking about a guy that could be a dominant tackle for a number of years. I just wonder about his ability to make it last full time. Yeah, he gets off the line really, really quickly, but after he gets off the line, he's just kind of there. I don't know. See, I'm trying not to bury this guy because I didn't like what I saw on tape, but I'm trying to give him the benefit of the doubt. I think he's a talented player. He's an athlete. He's not the best athlete, but he's long and he's strong. Again, I didn't like the tape. I know that teams are going to see what he has done and think that they can make him into that nasty guy. And, you do see that, but that's just a personal thing. I don't like that. So right now I've seen Leatherwood projected as a second or third round pick. That's not bad given the talent that's there. Like I said, I didn't like what I saw on tape personally. Again, you're talking about a developmental guy, so he would make sense for the Steelers. So Leatherwood in the second or third round, if you've addressed a different position in the first round, would not be a horrible pick. Again, just not my type of player. But, he had a good college career. It would be hard to argue with reasons for why a team like the Steelers would want to take him. Moving on to Robert Hainesy out of Notre Dame, a 6'5", 290-pound senior. Played in the Under Armour All-America game in 2016, a former 4-star recruit at the infamous IMG Academy, and was a first-team All-State player in 2016. The aforementioned Joe Moore Award, he was a part of that offensive line as a freshman, starting one game in 1 out of 13 games. Started 13 games as a sophomore, and then 8 more games as a junior before breaking his right ankle, and was second-team All-ACC this past year and a Senior Bowl invite with 12 starts. Keep in mind, Notre Dame, besides last season, is an independent and therefore wouldn't get nominations for all these conferences. Like, they got second-team All-ACC last year, did Robert Hainesy, but he wouldn't get it any of the other years he played because Notre Dame isn't in a conference. So overall, just kind of my opinion on Robert Hainesy is that I'm looking at a center, an interior offensive lineman, not a tackle. He's not really built like a tackle. He played it in college, but he's a little bit limited as an athlete. So he got away with it in college, but as he transitions to the NFL, he's probably going to have to play center and maybe guard, but he has shorter arms, so center is probably a good fit for him. And he played it at the Senior Bowl, so he played it well too. So I imagine that's where you're going to see him ending up down the line here. All right, so his best attributes, I thought outstanding first step quickness. He was a guy that explodes off the line and gets a lot of push from his initial steps. And he got into his pass sets really quickly and effectively. That's always something I've really appreciated about offensive linemen. Similarly to a guy like Alex Leatherwood, just getting right out and getting into his man. You know when the snap is. You know when the snap count is. If you can get off the line and get into your opponent before he can even get out of his stance, that's going to do you a lot of favors, even if it's a better player across from you. Also, he's not a great athlete, like I said. He's not a great athletic offensive lineman, but he's relatively nimble for a guy that's weighing around 300 pounds, and he puts in a lot of effort. He can get around the edge. He can be a lead blocker. He's not the best at it, but he moves pretty well. So I could see a future for him as a guy on the interior that can pull out and move on occasion from time to time. His weaknesses, definitely his lower body strength and his length. There's not a lot of power behind his legs. If you're talking about plays where he doesn't fire out quickly or it's pass blocking, his footwork is kind of a mess. I mean, he's all over the place. He's either not driving his feet or he's setting them too wide or too narrow. He doesn't get enough depth, especially with more athletic edge rushers getting right up and around him, or he'll overextend himself and allow himself to be undercut inside, and you never want to give up the inside as an offensive lineman. Top-heavy frame, not doing him any favors here either. He gets knocked down, pushed over more than you'd want. Again, I don't see him being a tackle at the NFL level. Hainsey's ceiling, I see his ceiling as a solid center that kind of bounces around the league as a spot starter or a backup, kind of like a BJ Finney type of guy. He's a guy that coaches are going to like. He's going to have a spot in the NFL, I think. I suppose his ceiling could be a potential starter in the NFL for a couple of years, but I see him more as a BJ Finney type. And his floor is a team tries to keep him at tackle and it just doesn't work out, or they move him to center and he just doesn't transition to the position well like we all think he's going to. All right, so Robert Hainsey. Let me see here. So in terms of his overall projection, again, there's some things to like here, but the fact that he's going to be switching positions, that always brings up a lot of question marks. And as far as tackles go, he is a tackle technically, but I think teams are going to see him more as interior offensive lineman, which makes him less valuable to NFL teams because they always prefer tackles to guards and centers. So I've seen him as a projected third-round pick, but I wouldn't be surprised if he slips to the fourth, maybe even the fifth round if for some reason there isn't a run on interior offensive linemen. But I think the fourth round is a good place for him. And if you're talking about the Steelers picking him up again, you're talking about a guy that's more of an interior offensive lineman when all's said and done. I think that's good. The Steelers need a replacement center for Marquise Pouncey. They don't have a ton of need for backups. They have J.C. Hasenauer and B.J. Finney, but I never hate the idea of addressing depth, especially at the offensive line position. So getting a guy like Hainsey wouldn't be a bad pick in my opinion. Last but not least, I'm going to be talking about Alaric Jackson from Iowa, another redshirt senior, another big man at 6'6" and 315 pounds. He's from Canada, born in Canada, and later on moved to Detroit, a former All-Michigan and All-City player in high school. Was a team captain and set school record for sacks in a season because he also played defensive line. Also ran track, played soccer, basketball, and baseball as well as football. So this guy was, you want to talk about a multi-sport athlete, this guy did it all. He really did. Got to take a bit of a break his freshman year, though, because he redshirted. But immediately started games at left tackle as a redshirt freshman and was a Big Ten freshman All-American. 10 games at left tackle, and then became a second-team All-Big Ten, starting 12 more games at left tackle as a sophomore, then 10 more games at left tackle. Again, second-team All-Big Ten. He had to miss 3 games due to injury. And then last year, first-team All-Big Ten with 8 more starts at left tackle and was a preseason All-American. So 42 games and starts all at left tackle. That's pretty impressive. You don't usually see guys slide into starting roles, even as a redshirt freshman, and start at just one position their entire career. And he only missed 3 games once he became a starter. So that was pretty impressive, all things considered. So when you're talking about Iowa, you're talking about a throwback school, a school that runs the ball. They have physical linemen, tight ends, running backs. They run the old traditional pro-style offense. And when it comes to Jackson, running the ball, that's his bread and butter. Run blocking is very good. He takes it on with great enthusiasm. Does a good job of getting not just down blocks and reach blocks, but he also does a good job, especially working with double teams, in my opinion. He can work to the second level with good effectiveness. And the way that Iowa runs their offense, they've churned out offensive linemen. Their coaches know what they're doing in developing these guys. And you can see that Jackson's best attribute being his run blocking. he's going to be a relatively good run blocker in the NFL as well. I mean, he knows what he's doing. And just like some of the other guys, like Alex Leatherwood and Robert Hainsey, I felt that Jackson's another strong attribute for him was his first step quickness, firing out of his stance. He was the fastest of all the guys I looked at when he gets off the line. He generates a ton of push, and it's strange because his stance, I thought, looked so awkward to me. Maybe it's just the way he looked on tape, but it almost looked like he was just in an awkward, like, squat, where he was, like, standing, kind of like crouched down, but, like, standing, not really leaning down. See, personally, not that anyone cares, but when I was playing, I always liked leaning forward a little bit because I always felt like it helped me get into the guy a little quicker. But he doesn't do that, and he still gets off really fast. So he deserves to be commended for that. Not every player has this ability. I know that it's been a thing that's come up a lot in this podcast for me, talking about Jackson and Leatherwood and Hainsey and about how quickly they get off the line. But I promise you, that's not an overly common thing. Oh, excuse me. On the other hand, though, there were a lot of flaws with his game, in my opinion. And just like some of the other guys I looked at, his footwork is extremely erratic. He just gets himself in really bad position with his feet. There were a lot of plays where he would allow a defender to just get around him, and he could have been able to get there, but he was just kind of tripping over himself. So it's just not good, especially after this many starts. You really want that to be better. And that footwork really hurts him in his pass pro. The issues mentioned before, a big part of it. He also has problems with his hand placement. When you're an offensive lineman, you want to be able to get your hands right in the center of the shoulder pads, right in the chest area. And Jackson too often is grabbing on the outside. And if you do that, you're going to get flagged for holding a lot. And that's not a position of strength. You're in a spot where you can get your arms knocked away. And if you can't hang on to defenders there, especially when your footwork is bad, you're going to be giving up pressures. You're going to be giving up sacks. So, another issue is that his arms are shorter, and hand fighting is going to be a problem for him too. So even though his body, he profiles as a tackle, shorter arms make it really hard for him to last. Will probably make it really hard for him to last a tackle. There's some ability here, but he's got a lot working against him. And even working with a good coaching staff in Iowa, I don't know if he's ever going to be anything more than an inconsistent player in terms of his pass blocking. So that's something to keep in mind as well. And again, another issue, cornerstone left tackles don't really have issues with upper body strength, but Jackson does. Bigger defensive lineman in college, he had a difficult time finishing his blocks facing guys like this. I wasn't seeing many instances of Jackson really pushing a big defensive lineman, a big defensive tackle around when he was being stymied in a pile or a one-on-one situation. He's got to bulk up a bit, and even then, he just might not be a great overly strong offensive lineman either. On the talent to production scale, I'd say that Jackson falls into, he'd be more of a production-based player with a little less talent. And I hate saying that players lack talent because it's not like this guy is a scrub by any means. He started 42 games. You have to be doing something right to do that at a Power 5 school. But he's just too inconsistent. It's okay to be inconsistent if you've only played 1 or 2 seasons, but this guy was a primary starter at Iowa for 4 seasons after he redshirted for a year, and he's still having similar problems to what he had as a redshirt freshman. I just don't know that he's ever going to break out of his bad habits, if his footwork is ever going to get better. I know new coaching can probably help him, but how much better is he going to get? That's the real question that these NFL teams are going to have to answer for themselves. His ceiling is that he's, one of those swing tackles, kind of like what we saw from Zack Banner and Chukwuma Okorafor in the past, and what Alejandro Villanueva was when Kelvin Beachum was still on the roster. A guy that has a ton of experience at left tackle, but could probably play some right tackle too. Be wary of his arms, though. I don't know if that's something that he'll be able to get around. That's just something he's always going to be dealing with a disadvantage at. But I suppose he could be a low-level starter, but I think he's always going to have his warts and his floor. His floor is that he's a guy that struggles to get through his rookie contract, to make it cut a couple times, may land on practice squads. I think he's better than the guys on the Steelers practice squad right now, but there are some clear limitations and issues that it's going to be hard for teams to ignore. Again, he never really got better the way that you would hope that a tackle would, getting as much playing time as he did. If the Steelers drafted him and he's being projected as a day 3 pick, early to mid day 3, if the Steelers are taking him, round 4 or 5, I don't know. He's going to be the number 4 tackle this year, even though I'm not a fan of Joe Hague. Jackson's problems, I don't know, can be fixed quickly enough for him to be the number 3 tackle. We'll see, though. You never know what happens. Even though I don't have a super high opinion on him, you never know. So, that's why you've got guys like Antonio Brown, Tom Brady, former 6th-round picks that turn into stars. So, I don't like shutting the door on guys or speaking in absolutes. So with that in mind, I'll mention my favorite and least favorite prospects of the 4 guys that I looked at. My favorite was Tevin Jenkins. I thought before the Steelers re-signed Zack Banner, I thought Jenkins would be a perfect guy to take at pick number 24. The biggest issue would be, can he play right away because of his inconsistent abilities in pass protection. But he would be an asset in the running game and is a true throwback player. Throwback player in that regard. Fantastic physicality, a great work ethic and demeanor. I would imagine that in time he could become a more consistent pass blocker. And with the Steelers transitioning to more of a run-heavy approach, he would fit in well. Again, he wants to improve the running game. Taking Tevin Jenkins would show that Rooney meant it. And then on the flip side, I wasn't a big fan of Alex Leatherwood. Let me say, it's not that I hated what I saw. There were things that I liked from his tape, but he's just not as consistent as I thought he was going to be for being ranked as high as he was. He doesn't have a high motor, not like Robert Hainsey was kind of like the opposite of that with a super high motor. Leatherwood's motor is just super, it's just not there. The Steelers traditionally don't like those types of players anyways. If he can get that motor going more consistently, he's going to be a pretty good player. I don't think he'll ever be a dominant player, but right now that's just a question mark I don't like a player to have. But there are boxes that he does check. So, again, I don't think that he's going to be a bad player. I didn't care for him as much as the other prospects I looked at today. But all in all, I still thought he was a solid player. So that wraps up my look at the 4 offensive tackle prospects. Tevin Jenkins, Alex Leatherwood, Robert Hainsey, and Alaric Jackson. Thank you for joining me today on Season 6, Episode 5, Part 2 of the podcast today. If you have any questions about the show, if you liked what you heard or didn't like what you heard and you have some ideas in terms of feedback, please feel free to email us at strongerthansteelpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks again for joining us. Check out our social media. We're on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram under the name Stronger Than Steel Podcast. We really appreciate any interaction we can get. So until next time, where I'll be talking about safeties, thank you for listening to the Stronger Than Steel podcast.
You have been listening to Stronger Than Steel podcast. Thank you for joining us today, and don't forget to check out our website listed in the description below.